All right. Welcome to our live broadcast here. I'm Aaron Boyd, editor of Fifth Domain, where we're talking with Paul Rosenzweig, who is a senior advisor with Chertoff Group and a former official at DHS, and these days is quite well known for being the most reliable leaker of Trump's former cyber executive orders. Now that we see that Trump has officially signed the order, we're going to break down what's in there, what's not in there, and what we can expect in the future. Paul, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really good to be with you.
So first off, you posted a version of this order last week. Anything different that really jumped out at you in the one that Trump signed today?
No, I haven't done a word for word side by side comparison in the short time it's been out. But as far as I can see, this is essentially the version that we saw a week or two ago. Some typos, some corrections, but there may be a new section hidden in there, but no big one.
Okay, then. So what does this say? What does this mean, I guess, first for federal agencies and the federal government? Does this order put something in there that's going to really change the way the government handles cybersecurity?
Not immediately. It may or it may not work a big change down the road. I mean, the one thing it does that is different is it expresses the view that federal agencies are responsible for their own cybersecurity, and we're going to treat the entire federal system as an enterprise. And that federal agency heads are going to be, it says, called to account for their failures. If that really comes to pass in the long run, then that will be a marked change, because essentially we're now going to start driving management of cybersecurity and part and parcel of all the other things that federal managers are responsible for: budget, personnel, that sort of thing. If the day comes when federal agency heads have a little scorecard that includes how did you do on your cybersecurity, that'll be a big thing. But this is the start of that process, not an immediate sea change in it.
Right. One of the things that President Trump talked about on the campaign trail and right after being elected was that he wanted to first see reviews of our cyber capabilities, our cyber weaknesses, a rundown of the adversaries. Is all that in this EO?
Yeah, I'm still counting, but I see 15 reports followed by 6 mandates to provide recommendations for change. So if all those reports come in timely and all the recommendations come in timely, 6 to 12 months from now, we may see some real modifications of federal policy. But, that's 15 reports and 6 recommendations from now. So your guess is as good as mine.
Well, I'm going to ask you to guess. So what do you think is those reports are going to say? Are there anything that we already know are definitely going to be in there? Or is there anything that you think might even surprise the president once it comes down?
Wow. Nobody ever paid me to guess. And you're getting what you're paying for here. My guess is that the single most significant change that we're going to see is a real change in the emphasis from federal responsibility to private sector responsibility supported by federal government. So that's a relatively significant change in emphasis, not in actual text and authority, but in actual emphasis. So what we may see, for example, are more supportive federal practices of providing information sharing, more supportive federal practices in sharing new tools that are developed, perhaps more supportive federal practices in providing tax credits, incentives, grants, well, the whole panoply of positive carrots, and a lot less of the sticks. Another change that we're going to see is that because the federal government is now going to be mandated to use the NIST cybersecurity framework as its own metric, we may see that framework becomes a little more operationalized in its context. It's been criticized as just a series of guidelines, and now it may get some real teeth and some real impetus in actually driving operational practice on a more tactical, fine-grained level. That's a guess. All those are guesses.
Right. Yeah. Well, and this is still early. Who knows how things are actually going to flesh out? But, one of the things with executive orders in particular, but really any piece of policy or regulation, some things have little effects, some things have deep effects that ripple throughout our entire society. How important is this EO to the cybersecurity framework of the federal government and the private sector in the U.S.? Is this a game changer?
No, it's not a game changer. It is and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think that this is an evolution, a step beyond where President Obama had us. I mean, if you think back to 10 years ago when the cybersecurity problems in the United States first kind of burst on the public conscious, or at least the federal conscious, we were at zero. I think President Bush took us from 0 to 20 in the last couple of years of his administration. President Obama took us from 20 to 50 or 60 on a scale. And this is President Trump trying to move us from 60 to 75 over the next 4 years, knowing that we will never get to 100. Because I think that the steps taken in the Bush and Obama administrations were of a piece, were built on each other, and were good building blocks for cybersecurity in a general way. I am pleased, frankly, that this report doesn't blow it all up and start all over again. I do think that one of the things that we might look for down the road is some of that blowing up. One of the things that President Trump has demonstrated, for good or for ill, is that he's not afraid to break some china in the relatively solid and staid world of Washington, D.C. And one thing that may come out of this down the road, especially if he gets some good cyber-educated, cyber-informed people to come on board and join him, is taking these reports and then maybe doing some game-changing steps. But they're not in here. This is setting the framework, and that might come 6 months from now, or not.
Well, that was going to be my next question, which is not necessarily what you know to be the next steps. What are the appropriate next steps after this? As this sets it up, there's going to be the reports that are coming out, but for the administration, now that it has this as its baseline, what does it do next?
Yeah,
I think the big, well, first it does a lot of the simple things well. It's going to have to work on improving the workforce, for example, and finding ways of getting better talent in and retaining it. I was just at the GISLA Awards last night, the Government Information Security Leadership Awards, and one of the things that they were talking about there is that the cybersecurity workforce in the federal government is aging out, actually, and we're not filling it in at the bottom fast enough, in large part because it's a lot more attractive for those people to go off to Silicon Valley or someplace else, or the finance industry. So some of the things that they're going to do are not going to be transformative, but essentially maintaining capabilities. If I had to guess about what the transformative pieces are, the big pieces are, I think that those are going to sound more in the nature of the U.S. government in the cyber domain on the international stage, international policies that attack more aggressively the cyber crime problem that is hidden behind the anonymity veil in Russia and China, more aggressive policies that combat the theft of American intellectual property, more aggressive use of, frankly, non-cyber tools and levers like economic sanctions, financial incentives, criminal law, information operations overseas that may or may not sound in the cyber domain. That's, I think, the more likely place that we'll see some interesting new and innovative kind of red lines, not in the defensive side, but in the responsive side, the deterrence side, if you will.
Interesting. Now, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing what you said before. You mentioned that you think that that this is kind of like the right touch. It's a bit of a light touch, but at the same time shows that the administration is willing to break things in the right way if necessary. Am I characterizing that correctly?
I think it's setting up the building blocks so that if it decides that it needs to in 6 months' time, it will have a baseline of knowledge and a series of recommendations that might support such activity. Yes.
Okay. So then if that's what you think of the EO as it is, what's missing from it? What do you not see in there that you think should have been, but that wouldn't change the overall message behind this EO?
That's a good question. I'll answer it in two ways. The first thing is not something that's missing, but that's something that's disappointing, which is it's a little sad to be looking for studies that are going to take another 120 days, or in some instances 180 days, and we're already 112 days in, 115 days in. This kind of reporting requirement, EO, would have been a lot better, and I'd have felt a lot, kind of, oh, good, jolly, that's fine, if it had come out on day 30 instead of day 120.
And that was going to be my next question. You've been. This isn't the draft that you posted last week. Wasn't the first draft you had posted. So obviously, you've been seeing the evolution of this over some time. What took so long?
Well, I think what took most long, and this was going to be my second point about not disappointment, but areas where there's a rub, is what took so long was really coordinating this with the new IT Modernization American Technology Council that Jared Kushner is going to be head of, and pulling, I mean, the story seems to be pulling that out and giving it its own separate tasking. And if I were to say what is missing, I don't read this or the ATC executive order and have a good understanding of how the two are going to work together. And to me, they are intrinsically related. IT modernization, developing a better timeline for procurement in the federal system, using DevOps, systems for IT development, software development, are really very much tied up with cybersecurity. They're also tied up with efficiency and providing better services to the American public, but they're at core, they're cybersecurity things as well. And I don't see where those two are going to really bolt up very well. Maybe that's TBD, to be solved, to be determined. But if that's the case, it's not really well set out here.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, because I'll also agree that I love the fact that IT modernization, shared services, a lot of these kind of would tend to be a little bit more wonky in the federal space, which is what I cover in my other hat at Federal Times. But it was good, I think, to see that meld, because this really felt more like a government executive order and less like an industry one.
Yes, I like that too. That's a very good characterization. I like that characterization.
Oh, there you go. Got a couple questions here from Twitter. One of them, I'll admit, it's a little cheeky, but there's something in here that I think is worth asking. So one of the questions is that Trump promised the cyber report in 90 days, and he never even assembled a team. Does he expect any agency to meet the 90-day deadline on reports? So again, it's a bit of a cheeky question, but I think the interesting thing in there is, how important is it that we meet the deadlines for all of these 15 plus reports that are in there?
Well, from the perspective of actually being able to achieve things, they're important, because as we've already discussed, we're already a little behind the power curve of a new administration's energy. On the other hand, and the actual reporting out will probably be delayed because the administration has not gotten very far in appointing responsible political officials. There's no head of NPPD yet at DHS. There's careerists in all of the positions that would be responsible for crafting the reports that are going to go into the recommendations that are going to become the policy. So they will tend to be less transformative as well, and so that too is a bit of a problem. I think the most significant problem, as I would see it, is that the delay here betokens a little bit of prioritization. which is that the reason for this delay is obviously that it got backed up behind immigration, healthcare, tax reform, whatever else it is that's on the president's plate. And I'm not going to critique him for that, because from his perspective, that's probably a macro good choice, right? But by contrast, President Obama came in kind of all guns blazing and said, give me a report, 90 days, we're going to do it, bam, 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 bam. And that set the platform for 8 years of relatively significant change in this domain in the cybersecurity domain for the federal government. So one of my concerns that I hope will not be realized, by the way, is simply that this is not as high a priority for President Trump as it was for President Obama, and that's and your snarky, cheeky Twitter question is actually onto something. If he would reframe it as, what does this tell us about how high a priority this is for the president? The answer is, it may tell us something that suggests that it's not as high a priority as it was for President Obama.
Yeah, yep. Another question we've got here: how does the cyber EO help forward a national?
Hang on a sec. I got a phone call coming in. Kevin, I'll call you right back.
This is what happens when
Sorry
you go
about
live.
that.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
what was the question?
How does cyber EO help forward a national, whole of government cyber posture and policy? What might it have left out in this regard?
Of starting that discussion, especially in denomination of the federal enterprise as a kind of unitary thing. It doesn't really give us a vision of how all of the different moving parts and recommendations are going to be integrated. Integrated with the ATC, integrated with national security concerns, integrated with homeland security concerns, and integrated with trade and law and policy concerns. I'm willing to give them an incomplete on that, because I want to think that that's going to be part of the next iteration. We will see.
All right. Another one here. What does the administration mean when they say holding agency heads accountable? Is this going to be like in OPM's case, where the director and then later the CIO, well, the director was let go and then the CIO resigned? Is that being held accountable, or are there other sticks, or is it going to be mostly carrots?
I hope it means both. The real answer to the question is I don't know yet, because they haven't told us. But I hope it means both. I hope it means rewards for improvements, rewards in terms of budget and personnel and kudos and all the things that go into making a federal employee happy, an agency head happy. And I hope it means the sticks of punishments. It doesn't have to be firing, right? But if a CIO is called in by the agency's head and said, why are all of my dashboard colors yellow or red and not green? And if you don't make them green within a year, we're going to have a very difficult discussion. That's a good thing. So I don't actually think we have to chop their heads off to get good results. But I do think that for too long it was down too far in the level.
Mm-hmm. All right, one more question off of Twitter, and I'm going to paraphrase it because it jumps around a bit. But what, particularly things like legacy IT, some of the more generalized cybersecurity issues, these aren't new things. They've been around for some time now. And in fact, as you mentioned before, President Obama even looked to tackle some of these issues. What does this EO do anything, or is there anything within the Trump administration, maybe being Kushner's involvement and the like, is there anything that you see that sets this administration and this EO up to be more successful than past efforts?
There are two things that I would say make it possible that this will be more successful. The first is that the cybersecurity EO, rightly, I think, changes the emphasis to private sector activity. And that is, I think, the right answer. The second that we've already alluded to is that the Kushner ATC is really looking at trying to be transformative in the IT space. And that's of course how you get past problems of legacy tech, is you try and jumpstart over the intervening thing and go right to where we are today. The federal government is a big bureaucracy with a huge hierarchy and is notoriously hard to improve in this space and in any other space. So I don't really see any reason to think that there will be this miracle transformation that drains the IT swamp, if you will. But I do think that both of those things point in the right direction and suggest that we're more likely than not to see some improvement.
Excellent. Paul, any final thoughts on content and timing of this EO?
Not really. I mean, come back to me in 6 months and we'll look at all the reports and see how we did.
Fantastic. We'll hold you to that, and we'll bring you on again then. Paul, thanks again for joining us. And if anybody out there, will be posting the recorded version of this on Fifth Domain with a link on Federal Times as well, if you want to check back afterwards. Paul, again, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.